there. My name is JB Portillo, and I'm here today to help you with some more fall sorts of information about weeds. I am a certified master gardener and a certified master naturalist. So things to me, the nature in particular is very, very important. I'm going to share my screen now, and let's get started. Okay, if you remember earlier in the spring, we talked about spring weeds. Today, we're going to go a little deeper and we're going to talk about, is a weed good or is it bad? And I'm going to let you decide. But as we go through, please note the little guy over here on my left with a happy face, that would be considered a good weed. In the middle, when you see this little thing, it will be like, I don't know, you decide. And over here with the poor little guy that looks like he needs a drink of water so badly, that's a bad weed. So keep that in mind, and let's move forward. All right, now before we ever get anywhere else, today we're going to talk a little bit about, this is my research. And all I'm doing today is to share with you what I found and give you food for thought and further investigation. I am not suggesting, even if I tell you some of these plants are edible, please don't go out and start eating them without doing some research yourself and making sure that you've identified that plant. And also the medicinal uses. Again, I'm not a doctor, I'm a naturalist. But these are suggested simply because other people have tried them or some of our ancestors have actually used these in the past. So here we go. Okay. I think, here we go. Yes. So who are you calling a weed? You know, because sometimes a weed may be a weed to you. But to me, when I see like a dandelion in the spring, I see a wish instead. So keep that in mind as well. So open-mindedness, that's what we expect from this presentation. And remember that some weeds are annuals and they seed heavily and they grow quickly. And perennials are slow to bloom and seed and start to grow a little bit more slowly, but they come back every year, hence the word perennial. So fall, you know, so far this year, because of all the rain, we haven't seen this gorgeous scene, but we will soon. And I love the fall. It's my very favorite time. But with it comes some things that may or may not be a lot of fun. So if you see the happy face and the green background, we're going to talk about good weeds, these three. We're going to talk about some not so bad weeds. And we are going to talk about like, oh no, get them out of my life, weeds. All right, so the very first one is called a common dayflower. Now remember, what I've got on the screen is just some identification for you to kind of look at. I'm going to be talking to you about the benefits of some of these plants and how to control them if you wish to. So for the common dayflower, the benefits are they're beautiful. They were originally cultivated as a garden flower and were introduced from Asia. The leaves and the flowers are edible, raw in salads, and can be dried as teas. And there's supposedly some medicinal use as an anti-inflammatory. But remember, keep it in mind to research all of that before you try it. If you want to control it for some reason, it's so resistant to commercial herbicides. It's not easy, but there are some methods for controlling it. And that one reasonably effective way is to pull the plants out by hand. That's what I do. I don't believe in commercial herbicides at all. So try to do this though when the soil is moist and workable. If the soil is hard, the stems will just break off from the roots and it just gives it a chance to grow again. Please try to remove this if you're going to before they drop their seeds. Another fall weed is a horsetail. It's also called the bottle brush sometimes. And it's easily, there are some medicinal uses, including a diuretic and topical wound treatment. May increase bone calcium, but poison is possible, however. This plant is not highly competitive, which means that, if other plants are growing around it, if you use compost, that will help decrease it by increasing the competition from the other plants. And then I see a lot of this lately. This is called Lady's Thumb, and it is a summer annual, and it can get pretty darn big. Sometimes it's called a Pennsylvania smartweed. It's unusual among weeds because of its pink color. Many weeds have yellow and blue flowers, but it has pink. And it provides nectar for beneficial wasps and small bees. To control it, mowing closer or more frequently cutting with a weed whacker. Now, I personally just pull it out. Thankfully, I don't have a lot of it. Otherwise, I'd be incredibly busy all the time pulling out weeds. Okay, now we get into those that may be a little more questionable. You notice the questionable flower in the blue frame over here. The next one we're going to talk about is nutsedge, yellow, and there's a purple one as well. And the tubulars, or the nutlets, are edible with a nutty taste and may be eaten raw or cooked. You can control it by pulling or smothering it with newspaper and mulch. That works the best. Do not plow this weed under, because that will simply make it spread. Another fall weed, it's called bindweed. This is particularly difficult to control. It may be considered attractive by bees as well as humans, but because it's hard to control because its roots twine underground, much like you see on the top. So what's above is also under. It can be a serious problem in pastures, as it is edible by grazers and can make harvesting very difficult by tangling up the equipment. If you want to use this as a flower for any reason, you might trellis it to guide its growth away from nearby plants and leave the flowers to enjoy. All right, morning glory. I personally love it for a while. It is very healthy and tenacious, actually. But I'll tell you a little story. My neighbor, who is 2 houses over, had this gorgeous trellis where she had morning glories blooming, and they were absolutely wonderful. Well, when the season was over, she pulled them all out and started over and did something else. Well, guess what showed up on my fence the very next year? A start of morning glory. And I love it. It's very showy, but it does tend to just take over everything and strangle any sort of other plants that's around it. I have cannas growing up nearby, and I swear it chokes them out every time. So I have to watch it, but I still think it's lovely. You can control it by breaking them off at the base, hoeing or pulling them very near the soil surface. Mulching does not control them, as their large seeds enable them to come up through thin layers of mulch. And like bindweed, like we just talked about earlier, it's really hard in the fields for the mechanical harvesters. Now, even though this is more of a summer, well, all year long, really, weed, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about poison ivy and some things that are comparable, or teach you a little bit about identification, because I still sometimes have trouble identifying poison ivy, thinking that it is something else, and you don't want to take any chances. It's actually a native of the United States, and as far as benefits go, in spite of the itchy rash that most of us get if we come in contact with it, the benefits are its berries are an excellent winter food source for the birds. It's best controlled in early spring when it's young, before other foliages hide it and its glossy red leaves. It hides. It loves to just hide in the bushes with something else. And in the first couple of years, it may be easily controlled with gloves and long sleeves and pants and socks and closed-toed shoes. But don't ever think about using a weed eater. All products advertised for its control, including full-strength vinegar, will be toxic to surrounding plants. So be careful if you use it. And the cool thing is You can rent a herd of goats to clear land in this part of the world. I think that is the coolest thing ever. And they'll eat it and anything around it, and it doesn't hurt them at all. So think about that. Rent a herd of goats to clean out your foliage. Now, let's talk about something that's sometimes confused with poison ivy. Actually, and it's even sold in garden stores. I can't figure out why, because it grows rampant in the woods. It's called Virginia creeper, and it has 4 or 5 leaves, but sometimes it may only have 3. And the juvenile plants have 3. One noticeable difference between poison ivy and Virginia creeper, if you're willing to get close enough to look, is that the vine of the Virginia creeper is woody. The wood-like vine has simple tentacles that hold the plant to its host. So it'll climb up a tree, it'll climb anywhere it gets a chance. Virginia creeper climbs up along other plants, bushes, trees, or supports. It has deep blue berries during the fall. We have a chart next that kind of compares several things. There is Virginia creeper, poison ivy, poison sumac, and poison oak. I'm not going to read this slide to you at all, but in general, remember we talked about Virginia creeper has 4 or 5 leaves, and it's harmless to the touch. It has blueberries. Poison ivy always has 3 leaves, and the center leaf is longer than the other and larger, and it's a climbing vine, and it has greenish white berries in the fall and can be really troublesome, almost emergency room troublesome for some of us. Poison sumac also has 3 leaves. It has red berries in the fall. It's like wet soil, and it also causes that itchy rash. Poison oak always has 3 leaves. It has greenish and white berries and causes that itchy rash. I don't know that I've ever seen poison oak or poison sumac here. It's probably here, and I just haven't seen it. But that chart kind of gives you some idea about how to identify it. Okay, all right. How many of you are just inundated with mulberry weed this year? I know it comes every year, but man, it is so obnoxious. And it's kind of interesting though, because it kind of looks like a small mulberry tree. The pea-side clusters are at each node, and it produces seeds like almost immediately. So even if it has like 3 leaves on it, it's going to start doing those copious amounts of seeds. And the larger plants that gets missed in the weeding process are really scary because they've already done so much damage. According to one source, the seeds are explosively discharged and spread up to 4 feet from the original plant. It does belong to the mulberry family, and a not so obvious fact when you look at the characteristics of the flower. Today, it's widespread in Asia, including China, the Philippines, and Australia, and it made its way probably to this country as a hitchhiker on maybe some of the returning equipment from World War II. It wasn't even really first identified here but in Louisiana in 1962, but it was really not heard of for the next 30 years. Then, in the mid-90s, it is suspected to have hitchhiked on a ride from nursery stock to gardens all over the southern United States. It likes a moist, shaded area. It requires light, but it's really not picky, and it's just, so difficult to get rid of. The first line of defense against this is to learn to identify it and then dispatch it post-haste to the trash bin. Do not put this in your compost heap because my pile never gets hot enough to kill those seeds. Be sure to pull it before it seeds and matures, which in landscaping beds is most concentrated right now in September and October. Okay, another really bad weed right now is Japanese knotweed. It was introduced as an ornamental because it has really striking shape and white inflorescence. Honeybees love it, and they make a deep, dark, rich honey from its blooms. It's edible in the early stages, but that's when the shoots are coming up about the time that daffodils do. It can be actually prepared like rhubarb or asparagus. Problem is, it's fast growing and invasive. It's extremely difficult to get rid of. Digging does not work. No individual herbicide will kill it. And it's rumored to be able to spread over 10 feet under concrete roads and sidewalks. So, extremely difficult to get rid of. Another one to watch out for is poison hemlock. And remember now, it looks very similar to Queen Anne's lace or yarrow. The flowers, though, are excellent sources of food for many pollinators, including the black swallowtail and beneficial wasp. But the problem is it's highly toxic to eat in any quantity. It's particularly a problem in a pasture, rendering the areas almost unfit for grazing. Regular lawn mowing will typically control it, but if the area can't be mowed, repeated pulling may be necessary. Mulch doesn't help, and it likes wet soil. Ragweed. Okay, now we're going to learn something here. The difference between ragweed and goldenrod. But first, let's talk about ragweed. Ragweed may have some medicinal uses, but its tendency to provoke allergies doesn't make it worth keeping around. It's not edible and not good for any beneficial insect or wildlife, and it's not even attractive. The problem is mowing makes ragweed shorter and less vigorous, but it will not kill it or keep it from flowering. Pulling and hoeing are highly effective, but both are very unpleasant activities. Mulching will reduce the seed emerging in the spring. So beware that strong allergies to ragweed may extend into allergies to related herbs such as chamomile. It may be confused with mugwort. Mugwort was used by the Romans, who are said to have planted it by the roadsides so that marching soldiers could put it in their shoes to relieve aching feet. St. John the Baptist was supposedly said to have worn a girdle of mugwort. In addition to its medical uses, mugwort has been used for smudging, protection, and inducing vivid dreams when you put it under your pillow. I don't think I'm going to try that one, but go for it if you want to. So let's get down to business here, because so many people, especially right now, because it's growing everywhere, see goldenrod growing along the highways and think, oh my goodness, ragweed. Well, ragweed's out there too. But the difference between the ragweed and the goldenrod is how they pollinate. Ragweed pollinates through the air, and that's why one of the reasons it's such a trouble allergen. It can travel hundreds of miles and even, they say, affecting people out at sea. The typical association with ragweed is that it's simply a weed that must be controlled, and this task is often pursued with industrial herbicides and other extreme measures. There is evidence that some of the native ancient populations cultivated its seeds as a food source, but when they discovered maize, it was probably given up in favor of something more edible. Now, in contrast, goldenrod is not only prettier, but it is not a cause for all the allergic reactions that take place. Goldenrod is actually pollinated by insects instead of the wind, and as such isn't responsible at all for all that sneezing that takes place across the country. Furthermore, it's used for a variety of medical uses, including a tonic for kidney-based infections. Some species of goldenrods are even cultivated deliberately for its beneficial properties. By remembering the difference between ragweed and goldenrod, we set the stage to enjoy the latter's many benefits and to stay away from the former as much as possible. So, I have some references here that back up my work, and I wanted to share those with you. And by the way, my email is at the end of this. If you are so inclined, I'd be glad to send anybody that emails me the notes from this if you'd like. So you decide, it's up to you. Good weed, bad weed, it's all in how you look at it. So thank you. If you have questions, you can reach me at portillo.jb@gmail.com or by viewing this at the Pea Ridge Library and on Facebook. Thank you.